At this very second, roughly a quarter to a third of every dollar you spend regulating the temperature in your home is vanishing straight through your windows. It is not escaping through your siding nor your attic. It is your glass. The United States Department of Energy has the data on this. Every single square foot of glazing in your residence leaks more warmth during the colder months and invites more heat inside during the warmer ones than any other material in your house. They estimate the total national expense of this thermal bleeding sits at over $20 billion every single year. That is pure financial drain, especially when you consider glass only accounts for roughly 15% of your exterior walls. A tiny sliver of your home's footprint is driving a third of your utility costs. Now, chances are you already have fabric hanging over most of those panes, but those coverings are effectively doing nothing. When you drape standard fabric from a standard rod, which is the default setup in nearly every American household, you only manage to curb the draft by about 10%. That 10% figure comes directly from the Department of Energy. It is a fraction so small you will never even notice it on your statement. However, if you take that exact same fabric over that exact same pane and securely fasten it to the surrounding trim using sticky hook and loop tape down the sides and a basic rigid board over the rod, your thermal loss plummets by 25 to 38%. Same exact fabric. The singular difference is a $5 roll of tape and 15 minutes of your day. That is a thoroughly documented metric. A scientist conducting research for Historic Scotland evaluated this exact setup on original single-pane sliding windows during freezing Scottish winters. When those fabrics were properly sealed around the edges, they cut the thermal bleed by up to 38%. They did not use high-tech materials or luxury drapes. They simply pinned the fabric directly to the wood so drafts could not flow behind it. If you wanted to buy a piece of modern glass that gives you that identical leap in efficiency, you would be paying between $300 and $800 per installation. For an average home with 10 frames, you are looking at a $3,000 to $8,000 renovation. Your other option is dropping $5 a room on some adhesive strips this weekend. Let me explain why sealing that perimeter is so crucial. Once you understand this mechanism, you will feel it every single time you walk past a window. When fabric just drapes loosely from a pole, it leaves open gaps across the top, down both sides, and along the floor. The heated air inside your room naturally travels upward and spills right over the curtain rod. It makes contact with the freezing glass pane. As that air cools down, it gets heavier and plummets straight down the surface of the glass. It hits the sill, pools up, and rushes out from beneath the hem, washing across your floor like an invisible cold stream. At the same time, more of your heated room air gets sucked over the top to replace what just fell. You have just created a convection cycle. You have a tiny, invisible motor operating between the glass and the fabric, actively draining the heat from your living space and delivering it directly to the most freezing spot in your house. Your unsealed drape is not preventing this cycle. It is actually acting as a funnel to accelerate it. But if you seal off those edges, the motor dies entirely. Hook and loop strips down the vertical trim, a valance or flat wood piece blocking the top, and the bottom hem pressed cleanly to the floor. Suddenly the air trapped directly against the glass cannot escape. It stops moving entirely, and stagnant air happens to be one of the greatest thermal barriers in existence. This is the exact identical physics underlying modern double-pane windows. They use dual panes of glass clamping a perfectly still pocket of gas in between. Securing your drapes forms that exact same pocket of dead air, only you are paying $5 instead of $300, and you can install it before your morning coffee gets cold. Way back in 1980, a researcher published findings that really should have revolutionized the way homeowners treat their glass. The study proved that the primary driver behind conserving energy with window treatments was not the thickness of the fabric. It was not the type of cloth, and it was not even if the box labeled it as a premium thermal layer. The deciding factor was strictly how thoroughly the edges were sealed. That one simple detail, the perimeter seal, drove the energy efficiency more than any other characteristic of the product. Over 4 decades of academic literature repeats that exact identical conclusion. The people who truly grasped this concept actually perfected it 7 centuries ago. Those massive, thick tapestries hanging in the halls of medieval fortresses were not put there to look pretty. They were life-saving insulation. The stone construction constantly leached the heat out. Glass was an absolute luxury, and most openings were just narrow gaps shielded by wood or animal skins. High-born families suspended those dense woolen layers with the specific intent of capturing a pocket of air between the tapestry and the masonry, creating a thermal dead zone to keep the living quarters habitable. Organizations like English Heritage have recorded this as a fundamental climate control tactic going all the way back to the 1100s. In fact, these heavy sheets traveled with the nobility whenever they relocated, bundled up like rugs, because they were classified as survival gear, not aesthetic decor. It is the exact same physics and the exact same principle today. A dense textile combined with an airtight gap provides massive thermal resistance. That core truth was well known, right up until the modern era brought us a home improvement sector that profits infinitely more from selling you brand new frames than explaining the basic physics of cloth. The Pacific Northwest National Laboratory actually took this concept and tested it on an entire structure. They utilized a pair of identical manufactured houses at their testing facility out in Richland, Washington. These buildings shared the exact same glazing, the exact same HVAC units, and faced the exact same direction. One building was outfitted with insulated coverings on every single pane. The control house just used basic vinyl blinds. The scientists tracked the total energy consumed for heating and cooling across entire seasons. The home with the sealed insulated fabrics saw a 17.6% drop in heating demand and over a 10% drop in cooling demand. Same building structure, same glass. The only difference was what was suspended on the interior. And remember, that 17.6% figure is for the whole house. The total energy required to climate control the entire building was slashed by nearly a fifth, strictly from modifying the window treatments. So let us break down exactly what this requires and what it delivers. If you already own standard drapes, creating that sealed perimeter will run you around $5 a frame. You apply adhesive hook and loop tape down both vertical edges of the trim and install a rigid valance or fabric barrier over the top to choke off the airflow above the bar. Just ensure the bottom of the fabric makes solid contact with the sill or the floor. Total materials to outfit an entire house will cost you maybe $30 to $50 and a few hours on a weekend. Just doing that drops your thermal bleed through the glass by a quarter to over a third. If you want to maximize this system, you can upgrade to dedicated thermal panels. You are looking for thick, multi-layered material featuring a white or reflective outward-facing side. That backing acts as a mirror, bouncing your radiant warmth back into your living room during the winter and reflecting the solar heat back out through the glass during the summer. These typically cost between $25 and $40 per panel at most major retailers. When you pair those heavy panels with the perimeter seal, you are skyrocketing that window's insulation rating from an R1 all the way to an R5 or R6. That means you are squeezing near triple pane performance out of single pane glass, and your total investment is under $50 a pop. A brand new replacement window will easily drain $300 to $800 from your wallet per frame. And ironically, that brand new window will still require drapes in front of it to operate at peak efficiency. There is one final element to this strategy that practically no one utilizes, despite the Department of Energy explicitly advising it. Pull those fabrics back on bright winter days. The sunlight striking your rugs, your couches, and your drywall through southern-facing panes is literally free warmth. It is actual thermal energy pumped into your living space for $0. Then, the moment the sun goes down, pull the fabric and press that perimeter seal shut. You harvest free solar radiation throughout the afternoon and trap it indoors overnight. When summer hits, you just flip the routine. Lock those drapes tight during the harshest daylight hours to block a third of the solar radiation that would normally blast through the pane. Then, pull them back once the sun sets. That is the entire protocol. Expose, cover, and secure. Peeling the hook and loop strips takes a fraction of a second, and pressing them back together takes another. It requires no hardware, no heavy lifting, just building a simple habit. Yet, the Department of Energy discovered that 3/4 of home window treatments are never adjusted. 75% of Americans are leaving the thermal tools they already own completely dormant. Now, this is not some grand cover-up. Let us be clear about that. Corporate executives did not sit in a boardroom and conspire to hide hook and loop tape from the public. The actual reason this is not caught on is far more basic. It is not exactly glamorous. Slapping adhesive strips onto your trim is never going to land your living room on the front page of a home decor magazine. And the home renovation sector thrives on selling you a dream. They want to sell you pristine glass, sleek modern frames, and high-end aesthetics. A cheap roll of sticky tape does not fit that fantasy. But here is the reality you need to weigh. When you pull the fabric shut, those strips are completely hidden behind the drape. You will never see them. And when you pull the fabric open, those adhesive lines are so flat and narrow that you will genuinely stop noticing them unless you stare directly at them. You are not making a choice between gorgeous glass and a hideous eyesore. You are making a choice between tiny, forgettable strips of fabric tape or intentionally bleeding a quarter to a third of your hard-earned climate control out into the yard every single day for the entire lifespan of your house. The international door and glass sector pulls in well over $250 billion annually. Not a single entity in that supply chain, from the factory floor to the guy driving the installation truck, stands to gain a dime by directing your attention to a $5 piece of fastening tape. The materials are sitting right there in the hardware store. They have been readily available for decades. The scientific data has been public since the 1980s. And the gap between a drape that conserves 10% of your energy and one that conserves 38% has nothing to do with your wallet. It is entirely about your installation method. Your HVAC unit is not struggling against the weather outside, it is struggling against your glass. And the most affordable, most effective solution for the leakiest material in your home is not a massive renovation. It is the fabric you already have hanging there, firmly secured to the trim, pulled back when the sun is out and sealed tight when it gets dark. It is the exact identical physics that kept Scottish keeps survivable through brutal winters 7 centuries ago. The science remains constant, the fabric remains constant. The only detail that shifted is that corporations cannot get rich by teaching you how to use it. If this is the sort of practical truth you value, hit that subscribe button. There is plenty more on the way.